We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Wadawurrung people, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
Hi there, Chris McKenzie here at WorkSafe. Welcome to another episode in the HSR podcast, helping you achieve better health and safety outcomes in your workplace. This series offers advice, guidance and support on a range of topics for health and safety representatives, employers and employees, from industry experts and leaders in OH&S. It's all brought to you by WorkSafe, Victoria's occupational health and safety regulator and workers' compensation insurer. Our job is to reduce workplace harm and improve outcomes for injured workers. But we can't be in every workplace all the time, which is why the role of health and safety representatives, or HSRs for short, is so important. They provide a crucial link between employers and employees in workplaces across Victoria. It is the HSR podcast brought to you by WorkSafe, helping achieve better health and safety outcomes in your workplace. So far in this series, we've learned all about the basics of consultation on OH&S matters, the importance of having health and safety representatives in your workplace, and the ins and outs of establishing designated work groups and electing HSRs. Make sure to catch up if you've missed any of those first 4 episodes. So now that we know what an HSR is and how they get elected, it's now time to find out what powers they have under Victoria's OH&S legislation. And who better to discuss that than one of WorkSafe's own HSRs, Lyka Croft.
Hi.
And WorkSafe's General Counsel and Executive Director of Legal and Governance, Mario Briffa. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Lyka, we'll come to you first. Could you tell us a little bit about your roles at WorkSafe, because you've got a couple, and why you're interested in HSRs?
Thanks, Chris. I'm the Workplace OH Training Coordinator. I work with Lee Bugden, the Training Audit Officer in the HSR training sector. We manage the HSR training program and ensure all our training providers meet WorkSafe's conditions of approval and ensure consistent quality training for HSRs in Victoria. My other role is I'm also HSR for a designated work group that consists of 2 areas, operational systems and business support. I've been a HSR since 2021. I feel HSRs play a pivotal role and can make a real difference in achieving better health and safety outcomes. And for me, that's something I'm very invested in. I think every worker should be able to feel safe at work.
Absolutely. And Mario, you're the General Counsel and Executive Director of Legal and Governance here at WorkSafe. Tell us a little bit about your role and why you think HSRs are so important.
Look, my role is to oversee all of WorkSafe's legal functions, which support all of our compliance and enforcement activities across WorkSafe in our capacity as regulator. And whether it's our inspectors on the ground, supporting our internal teams to support and provide guidance to those inspectors or our HSRs, or to prosecute employers who are not getting it right, my role is to make sure that our legal teams are giving the right advice to the right people at the right time to support the right health and safety outcomes at our workplaces. I think it's also important to call out that the health and safety legislation that WorkSafe's charged with overseeing also makes it clear how important HSRs are in ensuring safety in the workplace. We know this not only because there's an entirely dedicated section to HSRs, but because of the responsibilities and powers they are entrusted to exercise when they're representing the health and safety interests of employees in their designated work group.
You mentioned there, Mario, the powers that HSRs have. There are some really good reasons why they've got those strong powers, aren't there?
Absolutely. Their powers are designed to help them not just represent the members of their DWG, but to support them to identify potential risks in the workplace and, most importantly, to help avoid those risks from being realised. They will wear many hats in their capacity as a health and safety outcome influencer. That could be in the form of an educator by listening to employees who have concerns and providing them with guidance on how to approach a health and safety issue. They can also be a useful communicator and connector between employees and employers when they're trying to find a solution to a problem that impacts the workplace generally. But importantly, I think it's important to recognise that they can be advocates who take a stand when something's not right and formally represent the interests of employees where consultation and collaboration is not quite going right in a particular workplace context. I think it's also important to call out that these powers are complemented and supported by people here at WorkSafe. And I think that's a really important call out. We do this through the guidance that we can provide to HSRs about the action that they can take to resolve OHS issues before they materialise into an injury or something much worse in the form of a workplace fatality. They can also be a helpful information provider to our inspectors where WorkSafe needs to formally intervene in a matter that is not able to be resolved with the assistance of the HSR.
Lyka, as an HSR, could you tell us a little bit about the powers that you have for your designated working group?
Sure can, Chris. There's lots of them, but the key ones are that I have used in my role is to represent my designated work groups, health and safety. I'm also a key contact for consultation to occur. I also have the opportunity to attend the Health and Safety Wellbeing Committee meetings. So these meetings facilitate cooperation, developing and carrying out measures to improve the safety of workers and even assist in the development of health and safety standards, rules and procedures. And lastly, I also have a say how we as the workers think we should control our risk.
Thanks, Lyka. Let's bring in WorkSafe's Manager of Industry and Representation Support, Anita Ford, with some more details on those powers.
Here are some of the other powers HSRs have. Inspect any part of the workplace which a member of the DWG works after giving reasonable notice to the employer or in the event of an incident or any situation involving an immediate risk. Taking photos or measurements or even making sketches or recordings, that includes audio and visual these days, at any part of the workplace at which the member of the DWG works. Accompanying an inspector during a workplace inspection where the member of the DWG works, requiring the establishment of a health and safety committee. If a member of the DWG consents, be present at an interview concerning OHS between members and or inspectors or members and the employer. Important to remember though, the HSR is not permitted to take photographs or measurements or make sketches or recordings during these interviews. If the HSR is authorised to represent an independent contractor and that person consents, they can be present at an interview concerning OHS between that person and an inspector or the person and the employer. Wherever necessary, seek the assistance of any person, issue a provisional improvement notice, also known as a PIN, issue a direction to cease work after consultation has taken place with the employer.
So Mario, can you explain why it's so important for employers to know about the powers that HSRs have?
It's a very good question, and I think there are a lot of reasons why that's really important. First and foremost, employers need to be aware of HSR powers and the legal obligations they owe to HSRs. The first thing I learned in law school is that ignorance of the law is no excuse, and this is very much the case in the OHS space. An employer must know their health and safety obligations and duties, but more importantly, they must know how and when they need to consult with HSRs and their employees in order to address and discharge those duties. So HSRs also play an important role in workplace health and safety culture because often they know more about what's happening in the operationalisation of systems of work and how things are actually working on the ground versus how an employer expects them to be operating on paper. And I think it's really important to draw out this distinction because listening and taking into account the views of an HSR is probably key in this aspect of workplace safety. I also think it's important that they understand that when they're complying with their obligations under the health and safety legislations, that they have obligations to communicate and consult with HSRs on those health and safety issues and in a proactive way, and to cooperate with HSRs when they are formally exercising the powers given to them under the Act. As a rule of thumb, I would also encourage employers to reflect on this. While the powers that are given to HSRs are different to those that are given to our inspectors to varying degrees, employers need to make sure that they cooperate and treat HSRs in the same way WorkSafe expects employers to cooperate and treat its inspectors when they're discussing and inquiring into health and safety issues in the workplace.
Thanks, Mario. That's a really good way to put it. So, Lyka, how does it feel to have so much power within a workplace?
Well, I prefer to think of it as more within my designated work group. So WorkSafe is such a huge organisation, but obviously it's humbling to think that my team members trust me with their health and safety. But also, everything I do is within consultation with my boss and management representatives.
And with those powers, Lyka, do you ever feel like you're obliged to step into an issue and help?
No, not at all, Chris. One of the key things about being a HSR is that responsibility for health and safety doesn't sit with me. So I'm here to support and help, but I do not have a duty to do so. So being a HSR is a voluntary role, but also a role I'm very passionate about.
So a question I've been thinking about is, after an injury in a workplace, should an HSR be one of those that's made aware of it?
Yes, absolutely. As the HSR can immediately inspect the area, and the employer has an obligation to provide the HSR with information in relation to the health and safety of that member. It's also important, though, that this information does not include any medical info about that injured person unless they consent.
One of the newer powers recently entered into the legislation is that an HSR can take photos and make recordings in their workplace for the purposes of health and safety. Have you had experiences with that, Lyka?
Well, for me, my designated work group is internal. So that means office-based work most of the time. So we haven't had to yet, but in training we hear it has made a huge difference to those in the manufacturing or working with tools.
And do you have a deputy HSR, Lyka?
No. We have 2 elected HSRs in our designated work group. So if I'm not available, the other HSR is hopefully contactable. We made the decision during our negotiation that we would prefer to have 2 HSRs as opposed to having a deputy. However, I know each workplace is different.
Mario, coming back to you now, can you share with us some experiences you've had with HSRs and how they've improved workplace safety?
That's a good question, Chris. I've worked in many leadership positions, but I've also worked in many what I term worker bee positions, employee positions. And so I've had some really interesting and good interactions with HSRs, not just at WorkSafe, but also in other work that I've done. I think the most important thing to realise is that, as I mentioned earlier, HSRs are probably the ones that know most about what's happening on the ground. Most of the workplaces I've worked in are office-based, so we are constantly refreshing our knowledge on things like ergonomics as well as fatigue management and workload as well. Sometimes as a management representative now, I'm the one encouraging the HSR to inquire into something because I am an employee too. I've even worked with HSRs to help me with my strategic and operational business planning, especially around workload and fatigue management, given the work that we do here in legal and governance. And I feel comfortable doing this because I know that they will work with me to resolve the issue. I also want my own people to be safe because I don't want any of my colleagues and peers to be injured. While we all have formal roles, the shared understanding and outcome is the same too. And I think that's an important call out. Work together to prevent injuries. It's really that simple. So the HSRs across many of the DWGs in my business areas are people that I trust. I know have the best interests of their colleagues and my employees at heart, and will do everything that they can to make sure that none of us are injured in the workplace, regardless of the position that we hold in this particular workplace.
And speaking of working together, Lyka, you're an HSR in a fairly large company, but there are lots of HSRs around Victoria in smaller companies who might feel that they're on their own. Who can they turn to for assistance?
So there is a formal assistance under the OHS Act, such as the Inspectorate, our HSR support officers, and of course our advisory line. But HSRs also have the option to seek assistance from any person, really. So this power also enables HSRs to have access to independent advice when necessary to assist in carrying out their role. For instance, around COVID, with the ventilation system, you could speak to a specialist in air monitoring to get that advice around that at your workplace, for instance. However, it is important to remember that if you do seek advice, if it costs, that needs to be an arrangement prior to getting that advice.
And talking of support, what have you found as the most supportive thing as an HSR that your workplace has done for you?
Oh, since I was elected, I was allowed time off to attend HSR training, which is a 5-day course to provide me with the skills, knowledge and confidence to represent the members of my designated work group. But also being allowed time to attend events and conferences during Health and Safety Month. It's also great to connect with other HSRs during these events. And I really enjoy being a HSR, supporting my designated work group and having the opportunity to talk about health and safety matters. It's also great being in a supportive environment where I can do that as well.
And finally, Mario, coming to you, would you have any advice for anyone considering becoming an HSR or wondering about how they can help improve health and safety in their workplace?
I think, Chris, it's really a simple message. If you care about people and if you care about safety in the workplace, this role will be a breeze. So I'd strongly encourage you to do it, to put yourself out there, put yourself forward, because ultimately what you're doing is supporting your colleagues and your teammates to be safe at work. It's that simple.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us today, Mario.
Thank you.
And Lyka.
Awesome. Thank you.
Just to recap some of the main points covered in this episode, although the OH&S Act and regulations give HSRs certain powers, there were no additional duties on them other than those required of all employees in a workplace. The ultimate responsibility for providing a healthy and safe workplace rests with the employer. The OH&S Act sets out the specific powers of HSRs, and they may use these powers for the purposes of representing members of their designated working group, monitoring measures made by the employer to comply with the OH&S Act, inquiring about anything that poses a risk to the health and safety of their designated working group, and attempting to resolve OH&S issues with their employer in accordance with an agreed procedure or prescribed procedure if there is no agreed procedure. In some circumstances, a deputy HSR can exercise these powers on behalf of an HSR, and HSRs can only use their powers outside of their DWG if there's an immediate risk to health and safety, or if a member of another DWG asks for help. For further information on today's topic, you can check out the links in the text below. This has been another episode of the HSR podcast brought to you by WorkSafe, helping achieve better health and safety outcomes in your workplace. Next time, we're going to discuss what obligations employers have to health and safety representatives. Until then, if you have any OH&S issues or concerns or to lodge a case, you can contact WorkSafe's advisory service on 1800 136 089. You can also head to our website to subscribe to our monthly newsletter sharing news, events and resources for HSRs. And if you are an HSR in Victoria like Lyka, WorkSafe has dedicated support officers available whenever you need. Just email hsro@worksafe.vic.gov.au.
Please note, this information is based on laws applying in Victoria only. It is correct at the time of recording, but is not to be relied upon as legal advice. This episode does not outline all the legal obligations under Victoria's occupational health and safety laws.